Today I am sharing my journey through Victorian literature with the Victorian Literature Journey Tag. Hello book friends, I'm Jen and welcome to my reading life and welcome to another tag video. I hadn't heard of this tag until the lovely Kate Howe tagged me last week in this video. And Kate is one of my very favorite booktubers, and I adore everything that Kate puts out there into the world. And when she tagged me, I was so flattered. And I absolutely had to do this tag, even though I feel like a bit of an imposter doing this because my journey through Victorian literature, I don't know that it's really been much of a journey as of yet, though we are just starting out. We have left the house, we have put on our rucksack, and we're heading down the lane, but we haven't gotten very far yet. I think we can still turn around and see our home in the distance. So yes, my journey has been quite short so far, although it did actually start, as we will see in the tag, quite a long time ago. So first off, I have to give a shout out to the people who created this tag, which are Roz at Scallydandling About the Book and Tilly at Tilly's Shelf. But yes, so this is going to be a bit interesting. I pulled out my Jane Eyre mug because that seemed appropriate to talk about Victorian literature. I'm going to have a quick sip of tea and then we will get into the questions. The first question for the Victorian Literature Journey Tag is, what was your first experience reading Victorian literature and how was it? I'm going to expand a little bit on this question and just kind of talk a little bit about the baby steps I took into Victorian literature. And to be perfectly honest, I have read Victorian literature on and off throughout the years, but I don't think I ever really thought of categorizing or classifying those particular books when I was reading them as Victorian literature. I was just reading them because I was in the mood to read that particular book at that particular time, or it was for a class, or whatever the case might be. But being very pointed and specific about reading Victorian literature as a time period of novels isn't something that I ever thought about until very, very recently. So within the past year or two. So that is my caveat for this. So the very first Victorian novel that I ever read, and I had no idea when I was reading this that it was a Victorian novel, and that is Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. Yes, this lovely, wonderful middle grade book is a Victorian children's novel. And this was the last book that my mom and I read together, that she read out loud to me. And I have just such warm, fond memories of it. And I'm not particularly a horse person, but this story just touched my heart. And it's one of the first books that I read that really affected me in that way. And I will just always have the warmest feelings about it. And I am way, way overdue for a reread of this. So I'm hoping maybe this coming middle grade March, I will do a reread of Black Beauty because it's such a wonderful book. Then I have to say probably my next foray into Victorian literature was in junior high school. So I think I read Black Beauty. That was probably around age 8 or 9 when my mom read that to me. But junior high school here in the US, if you're not from the States, is usually for kids around ages 11 to 13 or 14. And so during that time period, I read, and I'm going to say I was forced to read for my English class, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And I know this is maybe going to be a bit of a spicy opinion for many Victorian lovers and Dickens fans out there, but I am not a fan of Great Expectations. Or let me caveat that by saying I was not a fan of Great Expectations when I read it at that time. I have not read it since then, though I have seen a couple of the movie adaptations. I saw the one with Gwyneth Paltrow and Ethan Hawke, and then I think I've seen another one. It still is a story that doesn't resonate with me really well. Miss Havisham just drives me absolutely crazy. I want her to clean her house and get out of her old wedding dress and throw away the disgusting moldy cake and just get on with life. That is truly my only takeaway from Great Expectations. And I disliked it so much when we read it, and I've never wanted to go back to it. So bring it on if you all want to try to convince me to reread Great Expectations and what I could possibly get out of it at this point in my life. But in a way, I think it sort of put me off Dickens a little bit. I've only read 2 other Dickens novels, and both of them are relatively short. And I have these Dickens novels sitting here on my unread shelf, which hopefully I will get to at some point. I would really like to work my way through Dickens books. I haven't done it yet. So that was my next foray into Victorian literature. Sorry, this is so long-winded. And then my next experience, which was another experience reading Dickens, and this wasn't until college, I read Oliver Twist for another English class, and I adored it. I just fell in love with the entire world and story of Oliver Twist. I was just so taken in by him and by all the characters. That was my sort of entryway into Victorian literature. I will also say I did take a Victorian literature class in college when I was an English major, and this is so terrible, but I don't remember much about it. We read Alice in Wonderland, which was a reread for me at that time, and I really enjoyed that and discussing it as part of a literature class from like a critical literary lens. So I really enjoyed that. But I don't remember what else we read. And I know we read 4 or 5 books for that class, and it just escapes me. That's terrible, isn't it? So I really need to find, I have a binder somewhere of all of the papers that I wrote in college, and I'm sure my Victorian lit papers are in there, and I should really find them and pull them out so I can remind myself what books I've read. Though maybe I'll feel even worse because maybe they're really wonderful books and I don't remember reading them at all. So that is my introduction into Victorian literature. Finally, on to question 2. I promise I won't be as long-winded for the rest of these. The second question is, has the reading of a Victorian book ever brought you to tears? If so, tell us more. Well, I already mentioned that Black Beauty really touched my heart, and this is definitely one of the very first books I can remember crying over. Oh, the ending of this is just heartbreaking. But it's so, so beautiful. Such a worthwhile story to read. So definitely Black Beauty made me cry. I would also have to say, I think Jane Eyre, you know, I don't know that I cried over Jane Eyre, but I definitely felt that like emotional well up over reading this novel. And I'm so excited. I'm buddy reading this with a few of my friends in November, and I can't wait. I have not read this book in so long, and it is a favorite. Other than that, like I said, I haven't read enough Victorian literature to really qualify and answer that question. So, and then question 3 is, are there any people who have played a significant role in your Victorian literature journey? Well, 100% I have to say Kate Howe. I think she is the entire reason I started thinking, Victorian literature. I should really think about that as like a thing unto itself, and about novels that fall into that time period and that category, and just works of literature, poetry, plays, you know, and kind of think about it in that way. And it really wasn't until I discovered her channel that I did start thinking about it. And then once I heard about Victober, which I think was a couple of years ago, I didn't really participate the first year. I participated last year a little bit, and again a little bit this year. So I'm just kind of dipping my toes into Victorian literature, but I'm really enjoying the journey. And Kate has helped me to discover that Victorian literature doesn't have to be this like kind of, I think sometimes people think of it as this very like maybe sort of dreary, kind of dark, kind of, you know, Dickensian type of novel, very long, very full of a huge cast of characters, and they certainly can be that. But there are so many wonderful books out there that are Victorian novels that I wouldn't ever have considered Victorian novels. Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome comes to mind. The Diary of a Nobody also comes to mind. Those are quite short. They are very funny. And I just think it has opened my eyes. Kate has opened my eyes to that, as well as the other hosts of Victober, discovering their channels and some of their recommendations. Definitely Katie at Books and Things. So it's just been helping me kind of wade into the waters of Victorian literature. So a shout out to the lovely hosts of Victober, because I probably wouldn't be reading Victorian literature without that. And then question 4 is, do you have a favorite film or TV adaptation of a Victorian book? What about one you would like to see made? Again, I haven't read enough Victorian literature to say, oh, this is a book I absolutely want to see made into a TV movie or a movie or a miniseries or what have you. So I think I'm going to skip that piece of the question, but I do have some favorites. I do love to watch Victorian novels that have been turned into particularly miniseries. I think all of my picks that I'm going to mention here are miniseries. The first miniseries I'm going to mention is Wives and Daughters, the adaptation of Elizabeth Gaskell's novel. And the miniseries is from, I think, 1999. I think my mom gifted it to me for Christmas, maybe around 2002. And I just was off of work after Christmas, and I sat down and binge watched it and just loved it. It felt very kind of Austen-esque, and I was, a huge fan of Jane Austen. And so it just had that kind of feel where we're following this family, and there's a village, and there's some romance, and I just completely adored it. Never thought to look for the book or read the book. I read it last year and loved it, by the way. But the miniseries is absolutely fantastic. And I actually rewatched it last year, and it was just as good. And then I also really love the Jane Eyre, the TV miniseries from 2006, just with, I think Ruth Wilson plays Jane Eyre, and I love it. I love it so, so, so much. I love Jane Eyre. I'm going to rewatch it again after I read Jane Eyre this November, and it's so good. I have seen the movie with, is it Mia Warzowski? Is that her name? And I enjoyed that one as well, but I just think the format of the miniseries just lends itself to more fully fleshing out the story of Jane Eyre, and I love it. And then another miniseries that I love is the Bleak House miniseries from 2005. No, I have not read Bleak House. I can't tell you if it's a good adaptation or not, though I know other people love that miniseries, so I'm going to say it probably is. And I want to read Bleak House. It's one of the Dickens books I have up here. It's so chunky. I do have the audiobook version as well, so when I decide to read Bleak House, I may do it that way. But I just love that adaptation. Anna Maxwell, what is her name? Martin? Anna Maxwell Martin? Something like that. Who plays she plays the main female character, whose name is escaping me. But she's just so delightful. I love her as an actress, and Bleak House was what made me really fall in love with her. And then I also really love Cranford, the miniseries adaptation from 2007, the one with Judi Dench, because how can you not love Judi Dench? Plus, it's just full of all these amazing, particularly women, British actresses, and it really showcases them. And Cranford's such a lovely village story, and I was completely sucked in when it was on PBS here in the States, and I would anxiously await each week it coming out with a new episode, and I need to rewatch that too. Also need to read Cranford, but I'm finishing up my Middlemarch read this year, so maybe I'll try Cranford next year. I know it's not quite as long, and actually, it's right here. There it is right there. So yes, I have it all ready and waiting for me. But those are some of the miniseries or TV adaptations that I love of Victorian novels. I could go on. I have more, but those are probably my top 4. And then question 5 is, what character in Victorian literature most resembles you or you identify with the most? I have no idea. Anyone out there want to play the game of who does Jen resemble in a Victorian novel? Leave your answers down in the comments. I don't have any clue. Again, have not read enough Victorian literature, or it's not familiar enough in my brain to think of who I want to be. I'd kind of like to be Alice from Alice in Wonderland. You know, I love a plucky, intrepid female heroine. Question 6, do you have a favorite moment, scene, or line from Victorian literature? Tell us about it or read it to us. Okay. I'm not going to talk too much about this book because I'm going to share it in my October wrap-up, but the book I read for Victober this year, which we also read for the Cozy Reader Book Club for October, was The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Spoiler alert, I loved it. I will talk more about it, like I said, in my wrap-up, but there is a line from here that I really want to start incorporating into my everyday life. And this line is said by Mrs. Catherick, and she has written a letter to one of the main characters, kind of telling her side of the story. And she is inviting him to come and visit her for tea at some point. And so she says at the very end of the letter, "My hour for tea is 5:30, and my buttered toast waits for nobody." And I just love that line. I think it was the only thing I underlined in the whole book. Mostly because I was just enjoying the story so much, I didn't want to stop and kind of annotate. But I had to mark that line because my buttered toast waits for no one. Delightful. And then question 7, does any Victorian literature intimidate you? If so, what and why? Well, and this is not the writing of these books at all, but purely due to the length of the novels and also due to the large number of novels both of these authors have written, but both Dickens and Trollope. Yeah, I find them intimidating just because I feel like it's an investment to go into them. And I know Trollope, I know some of the earlier, I have The Warden on my shelf, which is the first in the Barsetshire Chronicles, and it's quite short. It's not long at all, but I know once you go on from there, I have a few of the others in the series that I've picked up at different secondhand bookstores and things. They get quite chunky, and you know, you can see those Dickens books up there. I mean, they're chunksters. That is an investment of my time. And I do sometimes find when I'm reading long novels, I've mentioned this before, that I just like all the wind goes out of my sails in the middle of them, especially if the story kind of drags at all in the middle. But otherwise, I think maybe audiobooks are the way to go, particularly for Dickens. I think that's how I'm going to try to read him, is on audio, and then maybe do it like I've been doing Middlemarch, where I, you know, kind of tease it out over a long period of time so that I'm not just only reading that one book at any moment. So I can kind of dip in and out of it. I think that might keep me more engaged because I've really enjoyed how I've done Middlemarch this year. And my wrap up on that will be coming in a couple months. Question 8 is, what tips would you give to someone early on in their Victorian literature journey? I am early on in my Victorian literature journey, so here are the tips that I think will work for someone else who's in a similar boat to me. First of all, I think the most important thing is to not just think of Victorian literature as those big main authors that one normally thinks of or that normally comes to mind, like Dickens and Eliot, the Brontes, Trollope, Thackeray, all of these novelists who write these maybe, you know, seemingly more complex or not as easy to read novels, because there's so much out there in Victorian literature, which leads me to dip your toes into Victorian literature in genres that you already enjoy. So if you like middle grade books, find a children's literature Victorian novel. If you like to read plays or poetry or mysteries or, sort of sci-fi fantasy type books, you can find those things written in the Victorian era. And that might be a good place to start. So find something that you already sort of feel comfortable with and dive in there. Otherwise, pick something short. Pick something relatively quick and easy to read. Like I mentioned, Three Men in a Boat, Diary of a Nobody, even Alice in Wonderland, the Sherlock Holmes stories, like any of those would be fantastic places to start and just kind of, dip your toes in the water. And then I would also 100% say find booktubers and bookstagrammers who read Victorian literature, follow them, get recommendations from them, read the reviews that they have written, and I bet you'll find something that strikes a chord with you. That's what's worked for me, and I've definitely added to my Victorian literature TBR because of those wonderful people. So thank you to everybody out there who reviews and talks about Victorian literature. And then question 9 is, what is your top recommended read for other readers of Victorian literature? Well, my number one favorite Victorian novel of all time is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And I highly, highly recommend this. I read this for the first time, I don't know, a couple decades ago, long time, and just absolutely fell in love with it. I think it's quite readable. I don't think that the prose in any way is off-putting. I mean, this version I have seems quite chunky, but it's just the size of the book really that has made it this large. I don't think it feels particularly long like, say, a Dickens novel does, but I'm sorry, I keep throwing Dickens under the long novel bus, but he was paid, I think, by the installment, so he wrote quite long books that were serialized. Anyway, back to Jane Eyre. I just think this is such a beautiful story about a girl and how she makes the best of a very bad lot in life, and how it doesn't affect her character in a negative way, that she keeps true to herself throughout the whole book, despite some really horrific circumstances. And I just love Jane Eyre, and I'm so excited to reread it. I just can't. So if I was going to push one book on anybody, it would absolutely be Jane Eyre. I think it's a fantastic novel. And then question 10 is to tag people. But honestly, I don't know who to tag. All the people who I know who read Victorian books, I think, have done this tag. So if you're watching this and you're a booktuber and you have not done this tag and you want to do this tag, consider yourself tagged. Otherwise, I think I'm just going to end it there. Again, thank you, Kate, so much for tagging me for this video. It was very, very fun, even though who am I to talk about Victorian literature? I know so very, very little. But I am enjoying the journey very much, and maybe I'll have to redo this tag in a few years' time after I've read some more Victorian novels and see if my answers change at all. So I'll have to put that one in my memory banks and come back to it at some point. And if you enjoyed this video, if you could give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you aren't already subscribed. And definitely leave me a comment down below. Let's chat about all things Victorian literature. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any and all of these questions. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back with another video very soon. Bye.